Hello guys, welcome to another TBB59C video. This is the first video of this new podcast. I will read the book called The Sinking of the Bismarck, The Deadly Hunt by William Shirer. Okay, so let's start. Chapter 1, The Mighty Bismarck Goes to Sea. It was a dark and perilous time for Great Britain. The second spring of World War II had come, and the British stood alone against the seemingly invincible might of the German armed forces. Germany, which had provoked the war on September 1st, 1939, by attacking Poland, had conquered most of Europe. In 1940, led by the ruthless Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler, the Germans had overrun Norway, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, and France, and they had chased the remains of the British Expeditionary Force across the English Channel. After the fall of France, in late June 1940, Italy had come into the war on the side of Germany. Under another fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini, Italy was threatening the British position in the Mediterranean Sea and in Egypt. The Bismarck was launched at Hamburg on February 14, 1939, and the naming ceremony was performed by Frau von Lohenfeld, a granddaughter of Germany's famous chancellor. Before the launching took place, Adolf Hitler made a 12-minute speech in which he declared that the Bismarck laid the foundations of the Nazi state he wished to build. At the beginning of April 1941, the victorious German army had advanced into Yugoslavia and Greece and the Balkans and quickly occupied them. The British, who had come to the aid of the gallant but small Greek forces, were pushed out of the mainland of Greece. They were trying to make a stand on the Greek island of Crete. Crete. Do you know how to say that? I don't know. If you know, just tell me down there in the comment section below. At home, England was taking a severe battering from German bombers. All that winter of 1940 to 1941, the Nazi planes had come over night and day, dropping their lethal loads. Large areas of London and other cities lay in ruins. At sea, the British, whose navy had ruled the waves for centuries, were in a desperate situation, and it was getting worse. Since their summer conquests of 1940, the Germans had been able to utilize the harbors and airfields along the coast of Western Europe. These stretched from northern Norway to southern France. From their new bases, German submarines, warships, and bombers had ranged out to sea and taken a fearful toll of British shipping, on which the very existence of Britain depended. By the spring of 1941, British shipping losses had become so great that there was a grave question whether the island nation could hold out. In February and March of that year, the powerful new German battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau broke out into the Atlantic and sank 22 British merchant ships. Then they managed to get back to the French port of Brest. Early in May, the British Admiralty learned that the new German battleship Bismarck, the most powerful warship afloat in the world, had completed her trials in the Baltic. Any day now she might be put out to sea to prey on British shipping. Many of Britain's battleships and aircraft carriers were not available for use against the Bismarck in the Atlantic. They were on duty in the Mediterranean trying to check Italy, which had a large navy of its own. They were also busy helping the British armies fighting the Germans in Greece and the Italians in North Africa. On the morning of May 20th, 1941, the Germans launched the greatest airborne attack in the annals of warfare on the British positions in Crete. A large part of the British Mediterranean fleet rushed to the scene to help the army, which faced another defeat. There was gloom in London as news of the German airborne onslaught came in. But deeper gloom was to come from other news the next day. At 8 o'clock a.m. on May 21st, a coded message arrived at the Admiralty in London from a British agent in Sweden. On the previous afternoon, he had seen, from the Swedish shore, 2 large German warships steaming north through the strait between Sweden and Denmark. The ships were obviously en route to German-held Norway, from whose many harbors and fjords German warships in recent months had broken out into the Atlantic. The ominous report was flashed at once to Sir John Tovey, Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet. He was on his flagship, King George V, at Scapa Flow, the great naval base in the Orkney Islands at the northern tip of the British Isles. Sir John was a weary little man of quiet temperament, who remained calm in emergencies. He had a reputation in the Navy for spreading confidence and even optimism among his officers and his men. The news he received on the morning of May 21st did not surprise or shake him, but he realized its importance. He immediately summoned his staff officers to discuss it. Their task was to ascertain which German warships were putting to sea, what they were up to, and where. Then they could take appropriate counteraction. Admiral Tovey was quite sure that the reported German warships were the battleship Bismarck and heavy cruiser of the Hipper class, which was the Prinz Eugen. From naval intelligence, he knew their fighting qualities. I myself had seen the Bismarck and the cruiser Admiral Hipper in the naval yard at Hamburg on Christmas Day the year before. There I had an opportunity to learn something about these ships and their respective classes. They were more powerful than any British or American ships then afloat. I knew that the German government had lied in officially listing their size. At this time, the British and American navies were still abiding by a disarmament treaty which limited battleships to 35,000 tons and heavy cruisers to 10,000 tons. But the Germans, while listing their warships at approximately those figures, were actually building them bigger. The Bismarck displaced 42,800 tons, the Hipper-class cruisers 14,000 tons. The German battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, though registered as 28,000-ton ships, were in reality 31,000-ton ships. The Bismarck was easily the most powerful battleship afloat. It had 8 15-inch guns and 4 turrets, 2 fore and 2 aft. It had 81 smaller guns, mostly anti-aircraft. It had a speed of 28 knots, which could be increased to 31 knots, and extreme pressure. The most heavily armored ship yet built. It had the additional protection of a special anti-torpedo belt of nickel chrome steel. No torpedo then used by the British, or so the Germans believed, could penetrate this belt. The Germans were convinced that the Bismarck was practically unsinkable, and so it turned out to be, as we shall see. What the German battleship was up to, Admiral Tovey could easily guess. It would be gunning for British shipping in the Atlantic. At that moment, 10 precious convoys were at sea. An 11th convoy was scheduled to sail the next day for the Middle East. This was the most precious of all. It had 20,000 British troops on board. Not one of these convoys had sufficient naval protection to stand up to the mighty Bismarck. What did the British Navy have in fighting ships to watch the Bismarck? And more important to Sir John, what did they have to catch and sink her? No single British capital ship in the British fleet could match the Bismarck, with the possible exception of the 42,000-ton battlecruiser Hood, the largest vessel in the British Navy and its great pride. But the Hood, like all battle cruisers, had sacrificed armor protection for speed. Admiral Tovey knew that he was superior in numbers. He had his home fleet at Scapa Flow, 2 new 35,000-ton battleships, King George V, his flagship, and her sister ship, Prince of Wales. He also had the Hood, a brand new aircraft carrier. Victorious was at Scapa taking on planes, but she was due to sail the next day with the battlecruiser Repulse to escort the convoy of 20,000 troops for Egypt. Did he dare detach these 2 big ships if the convoy and risk losing 20,000 soldiers at sea? It was an agonizing question, but there were others. First, was it really the Bismarck that a British spy in Sweden had been putting out to sea? And second, where was she now, 24 hours after being sighted off the Swedish shore? He had to find questions to these questions at once. 2 Spitfire reconnaissance planes were sent out shortly before noon on May 21st to con Norwegian ports and fjords. One of them sighted 2 German warships in Grimstad Fjord, just south of Bergen, and dived in to take photographs. The pilot thought the ships were cruisers, but when his photographs were developed and scanned by expert naval eyes back in Britain, they revealed that one of the ships was undoubtedly the Bismarck. The other was a heavy cruiser of the Hipper class, though which one the British did not know. So the Mighty Bismarck was found. At once, orders were given to the Coastal Command to send over bombers that night to try and hit the German battleship while she lay at anchor. In the first daylight of the morrow, other planes would attack with torpedoes. When the weather, which was to play a commanding role in the ensuing drama, intervened, it grew worse and worse. Low clouds and fog brought the visibility down nearly to zero. The British sent out their bombers, but they could not find the target. Perhaps it was no longer there. Perhaps the Bismarck and our cruiser escort had already put out for the Atlantic. On the chance that they might have, Admiral Tovey moved that night to intercept them. At midnight, he dispatched a battle squadron from Scapa Flow under Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. This consisted of Holland's flagship, the Hood, the brand new battleship Prince of Wales, and 6 destroyers. The Prince of Wales was in fact so new that several parties of civilian mechanics were still working on her. They put out to sea with the ship, continuing their labors, especially on the big 14-inch gun turrets. These were not working very well. The squadron steered a course for Iceland, where it was to cover the Atlantic exits north and south of the island. There were, in fact, 4 passages through which the Germans might break out onto the North Atlantic. One was the Fair Island Channel, 60 miles wide, between the Shetland and Orkney Islands. North of this was a wider channel of 150 miles between the Shetlands and the Faroe Islands. Still farther north was the 240-mile-wide channel between the Faroes and Iceland, and between Iceland and Greenland was the Denmark Strait. The Germans had previously always used the Denmark Strait. Its low clouds and frequent snowstorms provided good cover, and it was farthest from the British naval and air bases. But it had one disadvantage. Though the strait was some 200 miles wide, an ice pack stretched out from the coast of Greenland toward Iceland. The ice pack narrowed the passage to about 60 miles of navigable water at this time of year. In the strait's northeastern end, the British had sown a minefield stretching out for about 50 miles from Iceland's northwest coast. Admiral Tovey believed the Bismarck could probably head for the Denmark Strait, but he could not be sure. He had to guard the other 3 channels as well. As the morning of May 22nd dawned, he did not even know whether the Bismarck was still at Bergen or not. Because of the weather, British reconnaissance planes could not find out. As the day passed, Tovey's anxieties grew. By afternoon, 24 hours had gone by since the German battleship was last spotted in Grimstad Fjord. By this time, For all Sir John knew, the enemy might be approaching the Denmark Strait or slipping through one of the more southerly passages, hidden from sight in the bad weather. Or the Bismarck might still be at Bergen. In this case, the British warships already searching for around Iceland would be wasting their fuel. The problem of conserving fuel oil, as we shall see, was to be a vital one for both sides. Finally, at 4:30 p.m., with the coastal command planes of the Royal Air Force still grounded by bad weather, the Navy got off one of its own aircraft in a desperate search for the Bismarck. This was an American Maryland bomber which had been used by the fleet for target towing. It had no proper navigational instruments or facilities for taking photographs. Nevertheless, it made its way through the clouds to the Norwegian coast, and at twilight swept down through an opening over Grimstad Fjord. The German ships were no longer there. Just to make sure, the plane flew low over the nearby port of Bergen through a hail of German anti-aircraft fire. It found no trace of the Bismarck and her cruiser there either. Fearing that he might be shot down any moment, the pilot got off an urgent radio message to Scapa. Bismarck and cruiser have left. On receipt of this message, Admiral Tovey lost no time. His home fleet weighed anchor at Scapa at 10 o'clock that night, as soon as the ships could get up to steam. So Tovey's flagship, the King George V, sallied out in the van, followed by the aircraft carrier Victorious. This also was a new ship whose planes had been taken on only the day before. None of her pilots had in fact ever landed on a carrier deck before. They had intended to practice while escorting the convoy of troops to Egypt. During the night, Admiral Tovey's squadron picked up the battle cruiser Repulse, which had also been detached from the convoy. The commander-in-chief sent out new orders to the Hood Squadron, already approaching Iceland. He also radioed the cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk, under the command of Rear Admiral W. F. Wake Walker, to increase their vigil in the icy Denmark Strait, where they were already on patrol. A powerful British armada was now at sea. The search for the Bismarck had begun. Thank you for watching this video. There will be more podcast episodes in the future. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video with your friends, and I'll see you later, guys, in the next video. Bye-bye!